It is Pride Month. How have we not yet talked about Sodom and Gomorrah? Today on Twitter, my friend Rabbi made a whole thread about Sodom and Gomorrah, and I want to read through it with you. Some of our Christian friends still believe the sin of Sodom was homosexuality. Let's settle this. Let's start back in Genesis 14, where the king of Sodom has engaged in a great battle in the valley of Sodom. We get a little idea of Sodom when we see that it loses the battle, has all its possessions taken, and the kings throw themselves into the pits, while the people of Sodom and Gomorrah escape to the hill country. Could this be a turning point for the people of Sodom to become inhospitable? Also, the sages ask, why would Lot settle and remain in such an evil place after it was attacked and he was robbed as well? The story of Sodom and Gomorrah is put on hold as we hear about Abraham impregnating Hagar, as Sarah could not bear a child at this time, and she gives birth to Ishmael. Apparently, this is all fine for modern Christians who deal in morality issues. Then Isaac is born in Genesis 18 verses 4, when three strangers, not identified as angels, this is so cool, I did not know this, in the text, but only in interpretation, seen as people or figures, come to Abraham's tent who ask if he can bathe their feet, a non-Israelite tradition that relates more to Arab culture, and after food and drink, the three figures walk down to Sodom. Then Yahweh appears and asks, and I just clarified with Rabbi Mike to make sure I understood it well, if he, she, it. So Yahweh is asking themselves, he, she, it, should I lie by omission to Abraham about the plan to destroy Sodom? Then to no one in particular, Yahweh says how the outrage of Sodom and Gomorrah is so great and the sin is so grave. Note that God says that the sin, singular, is so grave. The word is katatum, I apologize for my pronunciation, which is feminine singular. So God is speaking about one sin here. Abraham somehow figures out that God plans to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah and begins to negotiate with God to save the innocent people. The sin of Sodom is not explicitly said, just that there is one sin that makes them worthy of destruction. Abraham does his best to negotiate, but gives up after 10 innocents. God is apparently done with this, so God departs from Abraham and continues the plan. Two of the three figures now described as messengers are greeted by Lot the same way they were by Abraham, and Lot urges them not to spend the night in the city square, but rather in Lot's home. Lot is apparently aware of the dangers of the city. Here's where things get weird. A night before bedtime, a group described as a town council and the militia, literally the men of the city, the men of Sodom, gather around Lot's house and make a request or a demand of Lot to send out the two messengers so that they may neda otam. Some translate this to know them, a euphemism for intercourse, but the commentators add another option. The word veneda is a euphemism for the intention to kill these people, just as it is in Judges 19:22, as reported by a party involved there in 20 verses 5. A similar story to Sodom, but is later explained here. So it is possible that the author of Genesis 19 and Judges 19 through 20 used the same euphemism to kill rather than to grape. Lot, looking to protect the strangers over his virgin daughters, offers them up to the mob instead. Wow, super moral, right? But the mob isn't interested and explains why they want the messenger because he's a stranger who acts the ruler. More to the point, the people of Sodom tell Lot, we will deal worse with you than with them. For those thinking it was homosexuality, not sure how they would do worse homosexuality to Lot than the messengers, but rather the mob seems to threaten violence. Duh. God destroys Sodom and the meta-narrative continues. Homosexuality is never explicitly said as the sin of Sodom, nor does it seem likely that the entire town of gay men would break down a door to have sex with a man they felt ruled over them. Violence is far more likely. Sodom isn't mentioned in the Torah until Deuteronomy 29:22, when the soil is compared to Sodom's after it is destroyed, and then in Deuteronomy 32, verses 32, comparing it to another place as poison. Moses here is speaking of wickedness, but seems unlikely to be speaking about homosexuality. Sodom isn't mentioned again until Isaiah speaks against the wickedness of the kings of Judah. It seems unlikely that Isaiah's problem with Judah is that they are all homosexual. Rather, Isaiah goes on to give advice to Judah. Learn to do good. Devote yourselves to justice, aid the wronged, uphold the rights of the orphan, defend the cause of the widow, lest you become like Sodom. Jeremiah does the same thing, comparing Jerusalem to Sodom, not because of homosexuality, but because of false stealing and that they encourage evildoers. Then finally, we get it clear and simple explicitly from Ezekiel. As clear as it could be, Ezekiel says, "You were almost worse than Sodom," speaking, of course, as wickedness, not homosexuality. And then says the words all anti-LGBTQIA peeps wish to ignore. Only this was the sin of Sodom: arrogance. The city had plenty of bread, yet she did not support the poor and needy. Clear, concise, and speaks to the one singular sin of Sodom, as spoken about in Genesis. He even adds more context in verse 50. He's right, it's clear and concise. Only this was the sin of your sister Sodom: arrogance. They had plenty of bread, untroubled tranquility, yet they did not support the poor and needy. Jewish commentators took this, as we should, at face value. The Midrash of the 2nd century Common Era, the Rambam of the 12th century Common Era. Mishnah's 2nd century Common Era describes Sodom in plain terms, referring to a Sodom-type character who says, "Mine is mine and yours is yours." Again, arrogance is the sin, not homosexuality. Everything was clear even up to the 6th century until one Christian-influenced emperor, Justinian Corpus Civilis, thanks a lot, declared, with no basis, that Sodom's sin had been specifically same-sex activities and desire for them. He goes on to broaden the meaning for sodomy. So this guy, Emperor Justinian, broadened the meaning for sodomy to all sexual acts not related to procreation that were therefore deemed counter nature. So for instance, even solitary masturbation and anal intercourse between a male and a female were covered. This is where the idea turns. Not from a rabbi, not from a priest, not from a prophet, not from God, but from an emperor who had issues with certain sexual acts. That's it. This became law and Christianity followed it, despite so much evidence to the contrary. The only thing clear in the text is the sin of Sodom. Arrogance. Fiend. Can you believe that a 6th century emperor is the one responsible for changing the entire meaning of the word sodomy and the Sodom and Gomorrah story? Talk about arrogant. If you like this thread, you'll love my book, and I agree because I have it and I love it. Please get it. Also, if you want to hear more about the clobber passages in Sodom and Gomorrah, why don't you join us this Saturday at 4:30 Eastern Standard Time, where my friend Rabbi Mike and I will be on Skeptic Haven on YouTube. Come join the discussion. Bring your questions. We'd love to see you.